Have you ever been pushed into a corner simply because others believed you didn't deserve to stand in the center of the room? Have you ever worn your finest dress, carrying a lifetime of achievement within you, only to walk into a glittering banquet and be looked at as an intruder? As an unnecessary shadow? That is the pain millions of Black people have endured. Presence denied, voices swallowed, worth dismissed with nothing more than a cold glance. Yet from that very pain, another story has been written. A story of silent strength, of the yearning to be seen, to be recognized. Not just for one individual, but for an entire community forced to the margins. Picture the scene. A ballroom glittering with crystal chandeliers, laughter chiming in harmony with clinking glasses. Amid all the grandeur, a Black woman stands quietly. Then a voice cuts through, cold as ice. "Stand against the wall. Don't block our way." The whole room laughs. They believe they've put her in her place, the place reserved for outsiders. But what they don't know is that very moment marked the beginning of the reversal. And when the truth was finally revealed, the room fell silent. Laughter turned to unease. Arrogant faces froze into wax statues beneath her gaze. That night, it wasn't her, but them who were pushed back into the shadows. If you've ever witnessed or lived the sting of being dismissed like that, leave a like, share this story with others, and don't forget to hit subscribe and ring the bell. Because here we tell the stories that can make your heart pound and open your eyes to the truths that have been hidden. And now, come with me into that night. The night Selena Cross, a name they thought was nothing but a shadow on the margins, walked into the banquet, beginning at the very gate where the first humiliation was waiting for her. Selena Cross stood before the great wrought iron gates, where the crystal lights from inside spilled out like a waterfall of brilliance. In her hand was a stiff card, gold ink shimmering beneath the street lamp. A formal invitation delivered straight to her office, stamped with the seal of one of the city's most exclusive galas. She had prepared carefully. A black fitted dress, heels simple yet elegant, not a detail out of place. Her hair was pulled into a neat bun, curls framing her face. She had not come to flaunt, but to stand as an equal among those called powerful. Yet the moment Selena took her first step toward the gate, the cold stare of the security guard stopped her. The man in uniform, chest heavy with badges, glanced at the card and then scanned Selena from head to toe. His look was not security procedure, but a cold inspection. A smirk tugged at his lips as he asked, half laughing, half suspicious, "Are you sure you're invited?" The question dropped into the night like a block of ice. Selena stood still. She knew the card in her hand was real. Her name printed clearly, gold ink unmistakable. But the question wasn't aimed at the card. It was aimed at her skin, her presence, at the idea that someone like her could never belong past these gates. A memory flashed, being turned down at 20, dismissed with a shrug because she didn't fit the standard. Those weightless rejections that left heavy scars. Tonight, here, that memory lived again in the mocking tone of a gatekeeper. Selena's smile was faint, not to appease, but to steady her lips from trembling. She held out the card, voice even. "Perhaps you should read the name more carefully." The guard flicked his eyes over it, then back at her, expression unchanged. He looked at her as though the invitation were nothing more than scrap paper in the hands of someone who did not belong. Guests streamed past, gowns glittering, tuxedos gleaming. No questions asked. No one stopped. Only Selena stood, out of tune in the symphony of luxury. She knew the truth. In rooms like these, power wasn't in the card, it was in the gaze of those around you. And tonight, their gaze declared, "You don't belong here." Selena straightened her back, her eyes catching the light, glowing brighter. She didn't argue, didn't plead. In that instant, silence was her sharpest reply. What the guard didn't know, and what the crowd beyond those doors didn't know, was that Selena Cross's presence would soon turn this entire gala into a stage. And from the role of an outsider doubted at the gate, she would step into the center with a reversal that would leave them stunned. Because the real question wasn't, "Are you sure you're invited?" It was, Which of them truly deserves to stay when the truth is revealed? Selena extended the card again, her hand steady, the gold ink catching her face in the glow. The guard took it, glanced, then barked out a dry laugh. Not polite, not amused. A laugh dripping with insinuation. "Maybe someone sent it to the wrong address," he said, voice sharp, as if the card were nothing but a joke. The words cut through the iron gate like a dull knife slicing pride. A few guests raised brows, some exchanged glances over their wine, smiling as though they were watching an amusing scene. Selena didn't rush to answer. Her gaze locked on his, calm but deep, the kind of look that made anyone with sense uneasy. It didn't shout, it didn't argue. It simply reflected the pettiness back at him. "Wrong address?" she echoed, her voice soft as air but heavy as a bell. "Interesting. I used to think this city often sent invitations to the wrong address when they came to me. But in the end..." She paused, letting silence pull the air taut. The guard blinked, his composure fraying. "Ayabon, in the end, they were just afraid of seeing me walk through the door." The crowd stirred. A woman in a red gown whispered to her friend, smiling thinly as if the scene were delicious entertainment. A man patted the guard's shoulder, his words pitched just loud enough for Selena to hear. "Good job. Can't let just anyone in." Selena inhaled slowly. Instead of arguing, she smiled faintly. That smile carried irony. When suspicion becomes routine, composure itself is the sharpest counterpunch. She reclaimed the card, slid it back into her clutch like a piece of unnecessary evidence, and without another word, stepped aside. Her heels clicked against the stone, each beat like the drum roll to a performance yet to begin. The crowd kept flowing. A silver-haired man flashed his card, no check needed. A cluster of young white women drifted past, laughing, never slowed at all. Only Selena was stopped. Only Selena was doubted. Only Selena was told with a smirk, maybe the wrong address, but she knew the only mistake tonight wasn't in the card, nor in the gate. The real mistake was believing her presence could be erased with a dismissive line. Selena walked on, silent, each step ringing out like a warning. "The smirk you just gave will soon return to haunt you." For the gate was only the prologue. The real humiliation was waiting inside, beneath the chandeliers. Selena said nothing more. Her silence was so heavy it made the guard avert his eyes, though moments ago he had spoken with such smugness. She smoothed her dress, lifted her chin, and walked past the iron gate as if it never held any power over her. Her heels struck the stone path, sharp and steady, the sound mingling with the glow of lanterns along the trees. It was not the sound of someone sneaking where she didn't belong, but the stride of someone who knew. She had every right to be here. Yet to the eyes that watched, her presence was still an anomaly. A black woman, alone, entering a banquet where every familiar face was pale and smug. No one questioned their invitations. No one blocked their way. Only her fate had been placed in the hands of a stranger's smirk. Her gaze stayed cold, not from indifference, but from long practice at enduring hidden control. The suspicious glances, the innocent questions that stabbed pride. In that moment, a question hung, not from Selena's lips, but from the voice of the story itself. How many times have black women had to prove their right to enter a door that invited them? The question lingered, stretching beyond the ballroom walls, echoing through years of memory. Invitations sent with pomp, but when held by black hands, treated as counterfeit. Selena knew the sharpest humiliation isn't the loud laugh. It's the moment they make you wonder, do I even belong here? And if you crumble in that doubt, they've won without lifting a finger. But Selena refused. She walked on, her eyes seeking no one's approval. Her right to be there was not bestowed. It was earned, etched into years of work and triumph, untouchable by condescension. The building ahead glowed, music spilling into the night, perfume drifting on the breeze. Selena drew a deep breath, letting that light illuminate her resolve. She knew the trial at the gate was only rehearsal. Inside, she would face prejudice stripped bare. Her lips curved, half irony, half challenge. Selena Cross had not come to bow. And as the music swelled and the grand doors began to open, the audience was left to wonder, what games would they try next to keep her from the seat that was hers all along? The heavy doors closed behind her, and Selena stepped into a space drenched in brilliance. The ceiling soared high, glittering chandeliers scattering light across tables dressed in white linen, candles flickering like jewels. The air was thick with the scent of strong liquor and designer perfume. Everything in the room declared one message: only the chosen belonged here. Selena walked slowly, each step of her heels syncing with the soft strains of the violins. But as soon as she turned past the first row of tables, a woman in a deep red gown swiveled around. In her hand was an empty crystal glass. Without looking closely, without asking a question, she thrust the glass towards Selena with the reflex of someone too used to giving orders. "Refill, please," the woman said, her voice sweet enough to pass for polite. But beneath the sugar was contempt, the kind that assumed the black woman passing by must be staff. Selena froze, her cold eyes falling on the empty glass. The woman frowned, nudging. Quickly now. In that moment, Selena could have spoken. She could have announced she was an honored guest, even the very figure many had come tonight hoping to meet. But she did not. Instead, she reached out, calmly took the glass, and set it down on the nearest table with a deliberate, measured gesture. The action took only seconds, yet it was enough to bring color to the woman's cheeks. For Selena hadn't responded like someone obeying an order, nor like someone humiliated. She had placed the glass aside as if to say, "That is not my role, and the mistake is yours, not mine." The air shifted. A few guests turned, eyes gleaming with curiosity. They had expected an argument, a flare of anger, but instead they saw composure, and that somehow unsettled them more. The woman coughed lightly, hurriedly turning away, pretending to be absorbed in a new conversation. But her laugh had lost its polish, sounding off-key in the grand symphony around her. Selena kept walking, never looking back. The chandeliers cast light across her shoulders, making her silhouette rise taller, unyielding. She knew well. In this room, every look, every gesture would try to cut her down. And she knew, too, that sometimes the sharpest counterpunch wasn't a defense at all, but silence anchored in self-worth. The narrator's voice sliced into the air. How many times has a black woman been handed an empty glass that was never hers, simply because others could not imagine she might be there as a guest? Selena lifted her chin, her eyes fixed on the heart of the ballroom, where arrogant laughter still rang. And the audience understood. That empty glass was only the prelude to a far greater mistake, one soon to be exposed before everyone. She had placed the glass on the linen-draped table as if dropping a pebble into a river. Light, effortless. But it was the very lightness that made the woman freeze. That moment lasted only a few seconds, yet it tipped the balance of power. The woman in red still stood, her hand awkwardly suspended, waiting for something. An excuse, a protest, a flustered look. None came. Selena was not flustered. Instead, she raised her gaze, meeting the woman's eyes directly. It was not pleading. It was not anger. It was calm. A calm so sharp it made the woman's face burn. For in that gaze was a message. The mistake is not mine. It's yours. Silence cloaked the space between them. Music played, glasses clinked, laughter swirled. Yet in that corner, two women waged a quiet battle. The woman pressed her lips together, forcing a brittle smile. She dragged someone nearby into hasty chatter, but her voice trembled, breaking like a chipped piece of crystal. Anyone attentive could hear the fracture beneath. Selena said nothing. A faint smile brushed her lips as she turned away. To her, it wasn't worth an explanation, but for the woman in red, silence was the deeper wound. For nothing unsettles like being exposed without a chance to defend yourself. Some nearby had seen everything. A couple exchanged looks, surprise mixing with discomfort. Not discomfort at Selena, but at the truth they couldn't deny. They had just watched false power collapse under the weight of a single gaze. Selena walked on, head high, as if untouched. But the audience knew, inside a question echoed. How many times must black women wield silence as a weapon, turning humiliation into armor simply because others cannot fathom them as guests? That question wasn't confined to this ballroom. It belonged to the wider world where the same mistake played on repeat, like a background track no one wanted to hear. Selena paused at the steps leading to the center of the hall. She turned, scanning the room. Her face was neither angry nor fragile, only alight with a cold pride. In the crystal glow, she looked less like someone mistaken for staff, and more like a figure waiting in the wings, poised for her entrance. As the music swelled, the audience knew that mistake had only set the stage. The real humiliations were yet to come, and Selena Cross would meet them with silence sharp enough to cut. The woman in red stood rigid, hands still trembling. She tried to cover her unease with another laugh, but it rang thin, lifeless. Guests nearby who had watched the entire exchange began whispering, brows arched, lips curled. Some hid chuckles behind their glasses. No one defended her. Because in rooms like this, nothing entertains like watching someone arrogant stumble over their own disdain. She, who was used to commanding with a glance, used to bowed heads from servers, now became the evening's comedy, brought down by her own haste to belittle. Selena still hadn't spoken. Her eyes shone like a mirror, reflecting back the woman's blunder. Without lifting a hand, without saying a word, her silence had turned the scene into satire. And the guests, unwilling witnesses, became her audience. A middle-aged man leaned toward his companion, murmuring just loud enough. She should have looked before handing the glass. This won't wash away. His partner smirked. Habits like that don't die easy. Tonight, it's her turn to look foolish. Selena's smile deepened slightly. Not triumph, but irony. She knew well, in this room, ridicule usually aimed her way. But tonight, the shame had shifted, from the presumed outsider to the self-crowned insider. The woman in red ducked her head, fussing with her necklace. But the more she tried to hide, the clearer her embarrassment showed. Selena remained upright, her stillness making the contrast brutal, one floundering, one steady as stone. The ballroom's rhythm picked up again. Music, chatter, laughter. Yet the echo of that moment clung to the air. No one whispered about Selena's worth anymore. They whispered about the guest who humiliated herself with a glass she never should have raised. Selena moved on, her silhouette merging with the crowd. Behind her, whispers followed like a mocking refrain, a background chorus exposing the fragility of false power. The night was only beginning. And if one empty glass was enough to strip the facade, then when the guest list was read aloud, how many faces would be laid bare under the light? The music dipped, chandelier lights softened, and a single beam gathered on the small dais at the center of the hall. The MC, wearing a meticulously practiced smile, lifted the mic. His voice rang clear. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome tonight's very special VIP guests. Every head in the room turned toward the stage. Conversations ebbed, glasses were set down, and all attention funneled toward the list about to be read. This wasn't just ceremony, it was the moment that silently set the room's pecking order. Who would be named, who would be recognized, and who would remain an outsider. Selena sat near the back, one hand resting lightly on her thigh. She'd been through rituals like this before, but tonight, there was a strange current in the air, like something had been arranged. The MC began. Each name drew a polite round of applause. One after another, bright, familiar faces stepped up, smiled, bowed, shook hands like they had rehearsed 1,000 times. No one seemed surprised. No one was forgotten. Selena listened, steady-eyed. She knew her name was on that list. The invitation had spelled it out in gold. Impossible to mistake. She waited for that moment, for the formal acknowledgement in front of the whole room. But then, the list closed. The final person stepped onto the stage. The MC lowered his mic, smile still intact. Selena's name was never called. A small wave of whispers rippled through, quiet but sharp. Heads tilted, eyes slid toward the back where Selena sat. Someone leaned in to murmur, "Maybe she came to the wrong event." Another let a smile slip loud enough for the next table to hear. "I doubt they misread anything. Someone like her wouldn't be on it." Unlike her, Selena stayed still, spine straight, gaze on the stage. No sip of wine, no flicker at the mouth. She listened to the silence tightening around her, the kind of silence that takes the shape of violence without laying a hand. The MC moved on as if nothing had happened. But to Selena, each second was a quiet proclamation. "We reserve the right to erase you, even when your name is printed in gold." In that moment, the audience didn't just witness an omission. They saw a refined method of denial. No shouting, no escort to the door, just a silent strike-through. And that silence hurt more than any public insult. Selena drew a slow breath. She knew the night's theater was only beginning. If they thought a missing name would push her back into the shadows, they would soon learn that this silence was a drum roll for a reversal. When a name is erased under crystal lights, does the room understand it's forfeited its last chance to keep the facade intact? The polite applause faded, and a hush spread like a tablecloth across the hall. In that quiet, a man's voice rose from a nearby table. Not loud, but sharp enough to slice the air. "I doubt they misread it. Someone like her wouldn't be on that list." The words fell dry, but struck like a blade. Eyes swung again to the back where Selena sat. No one spoke, but half smiles and arched brows said the rest. The man who'd spoken showed no hint of shame. He sipped his drink, lounged back as if he'd offered a simple, uncontroversial fact. It wasn't a question, it was a ruling. And it wasn't aimed at the card or the list. It targeted Selena's right to exist in that room. Selena sat tall, shoulders unbowed. She turned her face toward the voice, her gaze cool. Not to clash, but to reflect. He hesitated for a beat, then looked away, feigning nonchalance. A small laugh bubbled from the next table like a background harmony. More whispers followed, phrases threading between clinking glasses. Who even invited her? Maybe she just came as someone's plus one. Getting a seat here must have taken some effort. Each whisper was a needle stitch, tightening the net of bias. Selena kept the faintest of smiles. It wasn't to mask hurt. It was how she forged hurt into a weapon. In her silence, she let their jeers expose their own smallness. A woman nearby shook her head but said nothing. In rooms like this, everyone feared their voice could become the next target. Complicit silence, as always, stood loyal to those who sneer. Selena lifted her glass and took a small sip. The crystal touched her lips. Chandelier light washed her face, a stark counterpoint to the shadows spreading through the whispers. In that posture, she wasn't a humiliated victim. She was the one waiting them out, letting them reveal themselves. The narrator pressed a quiet accent for the watchers. It's not that they erased her name from a list. They're erasing the last scraps of decency left in this room. Selena set her glass down, eyes narrowing slightly as if she could already see the rest of the script. By publicly denying her presence, did they realize each cutting aside was turning the ballroom into its own confession? She ran a fingertip around the rim, feeling for the hidden rhythm of the room. Another small sip. Her eyes stayed on the stage as the MC flowed breezily into the next segment. No mention of her, no apology. The evening rolled on as if she'd never been there. But Selena's silence wasn't surrender. It was a tautness, like a string pulled to breaking. The longer she refused to react, the more it unsettled them. A person supposed to be sidelined should protest, fluster, or leave. Instead, she sat, calmly drinking, making the silence itself her sharpest statement. The party didn't need her words. It wrote its own script. The murmurs kept radiating outward in widening rings. Maybe it was a mistake, but strange. How do you forget? Another chimed in. Forget? Please, that was deliberate. Not everyone wants to share the spotlight. Selena heard every note letting them sink like sour chords in the ballroom's counterfeit symphony. And in those sounds, she recognized it. This wasn't an accident. It was a plan, neat, practiced, and cruel. She set the glass down with unshaken hand. Her face remained calm, but her eyes flashed with a telltale light, the look of someone who has spotted the rigging in the rafters. The narrator's voice dropped, guiding the audience to the next act. Who ordered her name scrubbed? Who decided Selena Cross would never be spoken under chandelier light? The air thickened. Some pretended to resume their stories. Others lifted their glasses to cover the awkwardness. But the harder they tried, the more the hollow center showed. A name that should have been called, a seat that should have been affirmed. Selena leaned back a fraction, the corner of her mouth quirking in a smile edged with irony. Because she understood, they could strike her from this list for a moment, but they'd just etch their own names onto another, one recording those who exposed their fraudulence at the very height of their supposed power. The band shifted into a quicker tempo. The ballroom buzzed like nothing had happened. But for anyone following this story, the mood couldn't hide the truth. A covert game was in play, and Selena had become its unwilling center. If even a formal invitation can be erased in a few seconds, how long before a person's entire presence gets rubbed out as easily as a name on paper? Selena moved along the long, white-clothed tables, each step swallowed by bright laughter and the glitter of crystal. She kept her breath slow, steady, aware that every gaze around her was probing, waiting for the smallest crack to cling to. And then, amid all the strange faces, she found a familiar one. Victor? He stood by a round table, a glass of red in hand, wearing the kind of easy confidence that says the whole room is under control. Selena remembered perfectly. 7 years ago, when Victor's company was gasping on the brink, she was the one who invested, who even personally called a few suppliers to keep him alive. Back then, Victor had bowed his head in thanks, voice ragged with gratitude. Now, when Selena's eyes met his, he faltered. For one flickering beat, embarrassment washed over his face. Then, in a heartbeat, he pulled a smile back into place and turned away as if they'd never met. Selena held still, watching him clink glasses with a cluster of white businessmen. His voice rang out, bold and polished. When we trust each other, every partnership becomes unshakable. To the room, it sounded like a tidy business maxim. To Selena, it slashed like a backwards blade. The man who once begged her trust now preaching trust, right in front of her, while refusing to acknowledge she existed. She didn't step forward. She didn't call his name. The worst betrayals need no explanation. They live in the instant a familiar face deliberately turns away, eager to melt into the white-gloved circle as if acknowledging a past tie to a black woman were a burden too heavy to carry. Selena raised her glass and took a sip. The wine was bitter, but not as bitter as betrayal at the back of her throat. She let her stare rest on Victor a moment longer, just long enough that if he looked back, he'd feel it cut. He never turned. He laughed louder, let his voice swell with the music, sanding down that second of shame. The audience understood. This betrayal wasn't loud, wasn't theatrical. It was quiet, and it salted the wound deeper than any public insult. Strangers who look down on you? Predictable. But when someone who owes you turns away, it reveals a harsher truth. Prejudice can be strong enough to erase a debt of gratitude. Selena exhaled slowly, letting a thin smile cover her face. Not a forgiving smile. A reminder to herself that betrayal is just another card in this deck. She hadn't come to reclaim Victor's loyalty. She'd come to prove that even betrayed, she could stand upright in a room trying to unsee her. If betrayal had already stepped onto the stage, what lay ahead would be even more bare-knuckled. The question lingered. Who would turn next as the lights grew bright enough to show every true face? Victor swirled his wine, his grin widening as the men around him asked about recent wins. He knew how to center himself. Voice pitched just right, stories embroidered to spotlight his own hand. Then one of them tilted his head towards Selena at the back table. "Who's that woman?" he asked, not truly curious, but with the curl of someone sure he knows the room's rules. Victor stalled. His eyes flicked to Selena, and for a split second something like guilt flashed. Instead of telling the truth, he shrugged, letting a sly smile bloom. "Oh, she used to work for me for a while." The words drifted out lightly, but in the thick ballroom air they sliced like a knife. Heads turned. Faces that had been blank arranged themselves into knowing expressions. Someone nodded, smirking. "Ah, that explains it." Selena didn't move, her glass still aloft. She heard every syllable, every purposeful pause. The sentence didn't just distort the truth, it tried to rearrange the hierarchy. The woman who'd kept him afloat was demoted to someone who'd toiled under him. That wasn't careless forgetfulness, it was a calculated backstab. What made it crueler was Victor's calm delivery, like he'd shared a trivial anecdote barely worth the breath. Selena took another sip. The tannin bite wasn't in her throat anymore, it pooled deeper, in the space reserved for the betrayal of a man who owed her his career. Instead of letting that bitterness surface, she let it harden in her gaze, looking through Victor as if he'd just exposed his own smallness. A few guests chuckled as if they'd witnessed a neat little gag. But the laughter was thin, weightless. At some level, they recognized the sham behind it. That recognition made the moment more sour. Everyone saw, no one spoke. Selena set her glass down, the corner of her mouth lifting into a hard-to-read smile. She didn't stand. She didn't correct him. Sometimes a knife in the back carries its own evidence into the light. The narrator's voice dropped, pouring straight into the audience's ear. It isn't Selena who was diminished. Victor just masked himself in the face of an ungrateful debtor, lying to hide his cowardice. Selena looked Victor's way once more, fixing the scene in memory. And the question that remained, sharper than the wine, was this. Now that betrayal is out in the open, will Selena keep using silence to expose them, or wait for the exact moment to make the whole room see who really worked for whom? She sat quietly, one hand around the stem, that small smile still in place. From afar, she could have been any guest savoring the night, unbothered by what had been said. The truth was different. Beneath that smile, strands of memory and trust stretched tight, thin enough to snap. Betrayal never comes from strangers. Strangers can wound with a look, a chilly refusal. But betrayal comes from the ones who used your hands to stand, who clutched your help like a life ring and now pretend they've never known you. Victor had chosen that path. The easy one, and the craven one, turning his back to bask in the crowd's laughter, lowering the woman who lifted him just to stand shoulder to shoulder with faces he believes are more important. Selena let the bitterness soak in, then drew a long breath. She knew if she let the hurt spill, she'd hand Victor exactly what he wanted, a picture of a black woman undone by exclusion. No, she would not grant him that power. Her smile became a proud mask. But the audience, those following the story, could feel the tremor it covered. In Selena's silence lived a familiar ache, the ache of being knifed by someone who once sat beside you, who once held your hand through the storm. She turned the glass, light refracting through the red, into glints that looked like clotted blood and crystal. In that instant, her smile was a fine, etched line, thin, deep, and impossible to ignore. At the next table, the whispers shifted. They weren't about Selena anymore, they were about Victor. Someone clicked their tongue. He just told on himself. If she really worked for him, why does she still have a seat here? Another offered a tight laugh. Funny how the stories we invent to shrink others end up reflecting us exactly. Selena didn't need to speak. She let the room bite its own tongue. In that moment, betrayal stopped being a period and became proof. Proof that those who turn away trying to deny end up sketching the truest portrait of themselves. The narrator tapped softly at the listener's mind. Betrayal always wears a familiar face. But sometimes from that betrayal, a new truth emerges. Who deserves to keep walking? And who survives only by clinging to a lie? Selena lifted her glass again, the smile unchanged. But in her eyes, a spark caught. The spark of someone who has forged pain into a weapon and is waiting for the precise moment to strike. If betrayal has lit the fuse inside her, what happens when Selena Cross decides to let that flame roar right in the middle of the ballroom? The ballroom's energy was cresting, violins swelling like surf, crystal glasses clinking like a clock's cold chime. Selena stepped out from the narrow aisle toward the center, the hem of her black dress whispering over the glossy tile. She didn't hurry, didn't retreat. She simply took her place right where the chandelier light was brightest. That's when a man's voice cracked across the air, dry, sharp as a whip. "Who let a black staffer block the aisle, hug the wall?" The room froze for half a heartbeat, then filled with suppressed snickers. A few heads tilted toward Selena, eyes narrowing with delight. It wasn't just a command, it was a proclamation. In his eyes, she could only be service staff, never an equal guest. Selena stopped. Her body stilled, but her eyes, lit by the chandeliers, went ice-cold and clear. The powerful man, broad-shouldered, salt and pepper hair, lacquered in place, chest puffed with arrogance, stared at her with the certainty of someone who believes he's restoring order. The air stretched thin as a sheet about to rip. Nearby guests tittered behind their glasses, deliberately letting their mocking looks gleam through crystal. The unspoken consensus, right. She doesn't belong at the center. Selena drew a slow breath. In that instant, 1,000 past exiles rushed back. Conferences where she was accidentally mistaken for logistics, meetings where her chair was always placed in the far corner, just beyond the lights. All of it condensed into that barked command, another entry in a lifelong indictment. This time, she didn't leave. She didn't argue, didn't stride forward to spar. She only tipped her head, just slightly, letting her cool gaze meet his face as if asking, "Do you truly think you have the right to decide where I stand?" Without a word, she moved and stopped beside the granite wall. Light poured over her, turning her eyes to twin panes of glass. The room waited for a tell, a crack, a flare. Selena gave them nothing but silence. And that silence dropped to the temperature, turning their laughter into farce. She leaned against the wall, not like someone banished, but like a stone figure biding the moment to step out of shadow. Perhaps he believed he'd put Selena Cross in her place. But often the place they use to reduce you is the very stage that sets up the turn. When a black woman is ordered to hug the wall, who's really being shoved into a corner once truth arrives? The instant his shout ended, someone might as well have pressed a button. Laughter burst, ricocheting off the walls, rolling table to table like a chain reaction. High-pitched cackles, gravelly guffaws, snickers braided with the tink of glass. The room became a score of ridicule, with Selena as the single note offered up for sport. Someone tipped their head onto a friend's shoulder, laughing to hiccups. Another raised a glass and chimed, "That's right, order matters." The words braided into the music, a glittering, poisonous noise. Selena walked slowly, heels tapping an even beat on the marble, like a drum that answered mockery with rhythm. She didn't quicken to dodge it, didn't stall from shame. She moved with a chill composure as if their jeers were clearing her path toward the wall. Her eyes did not drop. If anything, the chandelier light made them blaze, twin beacons sweeping the room. They'd waited for a bowed head. Instead, they found a proud stare. A few smiles snagged and went off key. She stopped at the granite. Her back rested lightly on the cool stone, but nothing about her read as cornered. She stood like a silent pillar, letting the wave of mockery break itself to spray and fall. A young woman at a nearby table turned away, her face tinged with shame, hearing her own laugh as part of a bad song. A man's hand trembled at his glass when he met Selena's gaze. There was no hatred in it, only a quiet dare. "Keep laughing. You'll realize you're laughing into a mirror." Selena kept a thin smile, just enough to turn humiliation into a reversal. In that look, the audience felt a razor of satire. She wasn't the one pushed to the margins. She was testing how low the room would let itself sink. The laughter thinned into throat-clearing and strained grins. The phoniness stood naked. And in that beat, she made their insult a mirror, each person forced to see their own smallness. They thought they'd shoved her into shadow. In truth, the light bounced back and exposed the whole ridiculous room. When those who think they're laughing downward end up clowning themselves, how long can this mockery play before it becomes an indictment? Selena stood at the marble wall, spine straight, chin high. No one could mistake it for a defeated pose. She looked like a statue with a pulse, still towering, compelling the room to catch its reflection in her cool stare. A few stray laughs kept floating, out of rhythm, as if clinging to a joke already dissolving. Then her silence snuffed them. In that quiet, she didn't carry the face of a loser. She stood on an invisible stage that kept tugging every gaze her way. They'd meant to sideline her. Instead, they'd handed her a singular vantage, the only point in the room not blurred into the crowd. Round tables jammed close, murmurs running together. Everything blended except Selena. Set against the wall, she became the clean outline, the exclamation point in the evening's long, droning paragraph. A young guest who'd laughed a minute ago touched his chin, noticing how the chandelier seemed to pool its light in that corner. Another frowned, sensing his own seat had gone dim beside Selena's blazing quiet. Selena felt it. She didn't need the dais or the mic. By standing where they'd meant to shame her, she'd made it the most visible place in the room. The wall, meant to erase her from the center, had become a waiting stage, a focal point for gathering eyes. Her mouth curved into a fine, unreadable smile. For anyone who caught it, the message was wordless. You think you've placed me at the edge. In fact, you're all performing as my backdrop. In that light, Selena was no longer the one shooed aside. She was the silent center. Every leftover giggle, instead of shrinking her, only sharpened the contrast. On one side, a crowd clumsily hiding its fakery. On the other, a woman standing, unshaken, appearing to wait for a final curtain. The twist lived right here. The spot meant to shame can be the spot that shines. With a cold, steady silence, Selena Cross turned the wall into her stage. And with the stage set, the only question left was, when will she step out of that shadow and make the entire room go still? In the corner of the room, the murmur swelled again beneath the cover of music and clinking glasses. But it wasn't sparked by a toast or a new speech. It rose from whispers weaving between clusters of guests. Half smiles, half sneers, like spectators savoring a cheap sideshow. A woman in a sky blue gown tilted her head toward her friend, voice low but sharp enough to drift to the next table. She must have borrowed that dress. Otherwise, how could she possibly get into this party? The group erupted in giggles. The sound wasn't loud, but it cut with cruelty, like a fine needle prick, not deep at first, but sharp enough to leave raw welts that linger. A man standing nearby chimed in. Maybe she slipped in pretending. This place isn't meant for people. Like that. He let the last words trail off, but everyone knew exactly what like that meant. Selena heard it all. She didn't have to strain. Their whispers weren't hidden. In fact, they felt deliberately placed to reach her ears, as if to remind her they had the power to shove her down a rung. She stayed against the wall, posture unchanged. But her eyes narrowed slightly, not from hurt, but from the bitter déjà vu. She'd heard these refrains her whole life. Not refined enough. Not the right fit. Must have called in a favor. Always wrapped in false laughter, as if the packaging made the insult acceptable. Selena smoothed her gown, fingers steady, almost regal. This dress wasn't borrowed. It had been tailored for her, measured to the inch, cut from fabric she chose. And she hadn't snuck in. Her name was etched in gold on the invitation. But they wanted to rewrite the narrative, turning her presence into an accident, her dignity into an intrusion. A young man added, smirking. She looks like she's trying way too hard to prove she belongs. The crowd around him laughed again, a chorus of mockery pitched in harmony. Selena's lips curved. Thin, sharp as a blade. It wasn't a smile to dismiss their jabs, but to turn them into evidence of their own smallness. The more they spoke, the clearer it became. What unsettled them wasn't her dress or her name on the list. It was the fact she stood there, unmoved, unshaken. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was a mirror, reflecting their words back at them, exposing their absurdity. The ballroom buzzed as though nothing had happened. Yet those barbs lingered, floating in the air like smoke, leaving unease among the very people who'd launched them. And beneath it all, a question stirred in the minds of onlookers. If a black woman's dress could spark so much scorn, what would happen when the truth about the power she carried came to light? The whispers hadn't even faded before a sharper laugh cut through like a knife through cloth. A gray-haired man in a tailored suit, gold button glinting, leaned back in his chair with smug delight. He didn't bother lowering his voice. A lifetime on the margins, now clawing her way into a party for people who actually matter. The words echoed, punctuated by stifled chuckles from a few nearby. Some clinked glasses to dignify the cruelty as a sophisticated joke. The implication was clear. Selena's presence wasn't just wrong, it was a pitiful attempt to touch a world that wasn't hers. Selena remained against the wall, eyes fixed on the crowd, gaze steady as if etching their contempt into memory. She knew that comment wasn't just about her. It aimed at generations, at the long history of black women being shoved aside, forced to believe luxury and power belonged only to someone else. She didn't fire back. She only rotated her glass, the red wine swirling into a steady circle. The small gesture carried its own satire. His words weren't even weighty enough to disturb her calm. They were just clumsy noise interrupting the music. At a nearby table, a woman ducked her head, fiddling with her shoe to hide an awkward smile. She too recognized that his remark wasn't truth. It was prejudice slipping out of its mask. Around Selena, others noticed it as well. Her silence had flipped the dynamic, making him the one laid bare. Selena slowly lifted her gaze to him. Not a glare, not a challenge, but a patient stare, as if holding up a mirror. A look that said, "While you try to prove your importance by cutting me down, you've only revealed your own pettiness." The music swelled, but tension clung to the air. The man cleared his throat and turned away, but too late. His disdain had been broadcast to the entire hall. Selena sipped her wine, lips curled in a thin smile. Not to hide pain, but to transform humiliation into suspense. She knew comments like his would only amplify the impact of what was to come. The audience listening felt it seep in, the bitterness settling deeper. These weren't harmless whispers anymore. They were pieces of a larger game. She was being pushed outward, so that one step forward later could shake the entire board. The party carried on with laughter and music, but a question lingered in every mind. Who was really out of place here? A black woman who entered by honor, or those clinging to prejudice just to convince themselves they mattered? The snide remarks didn't stop. They spread, catching like fire on dry paper. From table to table, each voice added another cut, slicing deeper into the air. A blonde woman with curled hair, voice shrill, tilted her head. "I heard she only got here by luck. Can't imagine she achieved anything on her own." Her laugh rang out, brittle and cruel, as if injustice was an amusing pastime. Another guest chimed in, eyes flicking toward Selena. "If we let anyone in, what's left of this party's value?" The words didn't just sting Selena, they carved an invisible line, a border between us and her. Still, she stood, back to the wall, smile etched fine as if carved in stone. She didn't argue, didn't defend, but her silence pressed on each insult, magnifying it, forcing the room to hear its own injustice reverberating under the chandeliers. The air thickened. Even silent observers shifted uncomfortably. Some eyes softened with unease, a few brows furrowed, but no one spoke. Their silence became walls around her, sharpening her isolation. Selena swirled her glass, letting the red catch the light and streak across the tablecloth. In that moment, she looked like a conductor, orchestrating the discord, letting their ridicule rise into a grotesque symphony they themselves had to hear. The longer the mockery stretched, the more naked it became. They meant to shrink her. Instead, they exposed their own smallness. That truth held the audience tight, their outrage and curiosity rising in tandem. They wanted to know, how would Selena respond? Would she keep silent or unleash something that would shake the entire room? Selena set down her glass, eyes sweeping the crowd before pausing on an unseen point. Her smile lingered, sharper now, deeper, like a blade freshly honed. From a place they thought was marginal, she was already pulling the focus, without saying a word, just by standing there. The music swelled again, but it couldn't mask the echo of those barbs. Nothing said could be unsaid, and every guest, knowingly or not, had cast themselves as extras in a play Selena was directing. Amid that pressure, a question drilled straight into the listeners. When a black woman is surrounded by blatant ridicule, is her silence merely defense? Or is it the strike before the explosion? The music hiccuped and stopped. The orchestra went silent as if someone had yanked the plug. The room fell into a brief, heavy hush before the chandelier's light tightened into a cone over the stage. The MC stepped to center, the mic in his hand gleaming like it had been polished for a pivotal moment. He swept his gaze around the ballroom, a smile wide enough to hide any awkwardness. His voice rang steady, each word tolling like a bell. And now please welcome the host of tonight's gala. Every eye snapped to the stage. The table chatter died, glasses froze mid-toast. Everyone leaned in, as if this exact second would declare who belonged at the center and who would be pushed to the margins. Selena stayed at the wall, her back on the cold marble. Inside her, the snickers, the pile-on laughter, the knives of betrayal still clung like smoke. But her eyes never left the stage. This was the moment she'd been waiting for all night. Not to be applauded, but to flip the script. The MC cleared his throat, stretching the suspense like a director who knows how to keep an audience on the edge of their seats. Then he spoke slowly, cleanly, each syllable distinct. Selena Cross. Her name cracked across the room like thunder. A stunned stillness fell. Those who had whispered she was a fraud, those who declared she didn't belong, every one of them turned to stone. Wine glasses stalled in midair. Half-formed smiles froze on faces. A chair squeaked. Someone coughed. Another guest ducked under the table, pretending to search for something, anything, just to dodge the truth that had just flared to life. The woman they mocked, snubbed and shoved to the wall, was the host of the night. Selena didn't move. She let the silence sink into every corner, let every stare expose its shame. In that moment, she didn't need words. Her name, spoken under the lights, had already turned the ballroom into an audience facing its own farce. She lifted her glass, took a small sip, sweet as a barb. The simple black dress, the bright, steady eyes, the marginal spot she'd claimed, all at once became the room's only focal point. No one dared to laugh again. The glittering pretense collapsed under two words: Selena Cross. After exposing the entire room with nothing but a name, how would Selena step forward and turn shock into a verdict on everyone who'd laughed at her? Selena Cross. As the echo faded, the ballroom dropped into a vacuum. Not a luxurious hush, but a stifling one, where laughter stuck in throats and breaths snagged halfway up. A heartbeat ago they were jeering, now they stared, as if slapped by their own hands. The woman in the red gown, the one who'd thrust her empty glass at Selena, sat frozen, eyes wide. Her fingers clutched her necklace like a lifeline. The gray-haired man who'd boomed that she didn't belong lowered his glass in a panic, face blanching. The clinks and chuckles from a minute earlier smeared across the scene like stains no one could scrub out. Selena remained at the wall, chin lifted, eyes sweeping the room. She didn't step out yet. She let them sit with the picture they'd painted of themselves, the swaggering bravado curdled into farce. Like a satire where the loudest chest beater realizes he's the extra while the dismissed woman is the lead. A chair scraped. One guest tried to stand and clap, then faltered, hand hovering midair before falling, exposed and awkward. Another pretended to check her phone, the black screen reflecting a flushed face. It was all patchwork theater, flimsy and transparent. Selena took a step, her heel on stone at drum hit starting the act. The room, which thought it was enjoying light entertainment, was yanked back into its real role. A captive audience forced to watch its own absurdity. The mockers became the joke. The gatekeepers had nowhere to hide. She moved off the wall in no hurry, her stride claiming space with each measured step. The lights followed her, crowning her the lone point of brightness in a crowded hall. No one spoke. No one dared snicker. For a breath, the silence mattered more than any ovation. Selena let the irony spread, let each person who'd diminished her taste the bitterness of their own punchline. And under the blaze of crystal, she emerged not just as an honored guest, but as the keeper of the script, turning their barbs into the wrong lines of a show already collapsing. The room, for all its polish, had been set in front of a giant mirror, and in it, it wasn't Selena who looked small, it was them, ridiculous and unmasked. Would she stop at letting them stew in their shame, or go further, forging that silence into a sentence none of them would ever forget? Selena left the wall and walked toward the center of the hall. Each step struck the marble, booming enough to set the room's tempo without any orchestra. The chandelier glow cut her out from the crowd as if the ballroom itself had accidentally made her a stage. All eyes fixed on her. Some panicked, some evasive, most of them stuck. Faces that had laughed now simply staring, as if watching their own joke turn back on them. She stopped dead beneath the brightest light. No raised hand, no speech. Just a slow sweep of her gaze. Table to table, face to face, person by person who had reveled a moment earlier. That look needed no blade or shield, yet it sliced clean enough to make shoulders curl and eyes drop behind hurried sips of wine. The silence wasn't empty. It was a blade laid at the throat. Not cutting, not plunging, but hot enough to rush blood to the face. Each look from Selena shoved their jeers back at them as evidence. The woman in red folded in on herself, lips pressed thin. The gray-haired man dabbed his brow, sweat shining in the light. Victor, at a front table, pretended to contemplate his glass, the tremor in his hand betraying him. The opulent room had become a field of battle with only one weapon, an unspoken gaze. Selena turned slightly, the light moved with her. She paused, letting the quiet stretch until everyone could hear their own heartbeat. No accusations, no command. Her presence alone thickened the air into a silent judgment. Then slowly her mouth curved. A fine, stone-cut smile. Not happy, assured. The expression of someone who knows exactly where she stands and exactly how the room has stripped itself bare. No one spoke. The hush had stopped being awkward. It had weight now, forcing each person to wrestle with the shame reflected back at them. She didn't need to speak. Her silence did the work, exposing the room's fraudulence. Sometimes a searing line can't match a single look that makes 100 heads bow. She took one more step, her gaze skimming the air like a knife edge. And now, the real storm had only just begun. After turning silence into a blade, what will Selena cut through first in this polished, counterfeit room? Selena stood tall beneath the crystal lights, the wall behind her now reduced to a meaningless backdrop. The crowded room had become her stage, the only stage where every eye was forced to look her way. No one could hide their discomfort anymore. The silence, stretched taut like pulled wire, had revealed every wrinkle of falsehood. Her gaze swept slowly from the front tables to the back rows where a few guests still tried to hold their composure. But it was exactly the stiffness in their half-smiles, the strain in their eyes that made the scene even more pitiful. Selena drew a breath, then spoke. Her voice wasn't loud, but each word struck the marble floor, rebounded, and filled the four walls. How interesting. She paused, letting the silence dig deeper into the chests of those before her. I was told to stand exactly where you've always wanted me, at the margins. A few eyes flickered. A handful of coughs scattered through the room, thin attempts to cover unease. But Selena did not stop. What you didn't know is... Her eyes blazed, steady with the calmness honed through decades of rejection. This entire room has always belonged to me. The words fell like a blade, sharp, irreversible. A woman clutched her wine glass, fingers trembling until crimson liquid spilled over the rim. A man at the next table lowered his face to the floor while Victor gulped too quickly, choking on his drink until a harsh cough betrayed him. Those who had laughed loudest now sat like stone statues, scrambling to conceal their faces. Selena did not lift her chin in arrogance nor sharpen her tone in anger. It was her calmness that cut deepest. Because this wasn't a furious outburst, it was a cold confirmation. The truth was out, and nothing could cover it again. Every syllable of "belonged to me" rang like a bronze bell, reminding them that true power never rested in mocking laughter or seats near the stage. It resided in the ability to turn a dismissed corner into a crown. The room froze. No one dared interrupt. No one dared object. All they could do was sit and listen to the verdict being handed down by the very woman they had tried to bury in shadow. Selena's eyes swept again. Not knives now, but mirrors, and whoever met her gaze saw their own distorted reflection staring back. If with a single sentence Selena could force the entire room into silence, what will happen when she decides to expose the full truth buried inside this gala? Her words still lingered in the air, an echo refusing to fade. The hall sank into a silence so heavy one could hear a pin fall on the marble floor. No more giggles, no more clinking glasses of mockery. The smiles that had been loud moments before now stiffened on faces, warped like cracked masks. Selena stood at the center, her eyes steady, not lowered, not seeking approval. That composure thickened the air further. Because had she shouted, had she slammed her fist, they could have dismissed it as an outburst, but she hadn't. She had spoken softly, and that softness had become the hardest blow of all, leaving the entire room gasping. Some guests tugged at their ties, trying to hide their nerves. A young woman bent low for a napkin, hands trembling so badly she knocked over her silver fork. Victor, the man who had denied ever knowing her, sat frozen, gripping his glass tight, eyes dodging hers, terrified that even one glance might expose his betrayal. No one dared break the silence. Even the MC, usually master of awkward moments, stood with his microphone trembling, a forced smile glued to his lips, unable to produce another word. Selena swirled her glass, letting the chandelier light scatter into streaks of red across the white tablecloths. That tiny gesture became the room's center of gravity, as if the entire hall was being directed by nothing more than a flick of her wrist. The quieter they stayed, the louder the silence roared. The lavish hall, with its long tables, towering flowers, and glowing candles, suddenly looked like a clumsy stage. And the audience of this play were the very mockers themselves, unwilling actors now trapped in the tragedy they had authored. Selena said no more. She let the atmosphere seep into them, an invisible verdict. Because sometimes the harshest accusation isn't a scream, but a silence so dense no one dares breathe. Shifty glances, clenched napkins, feigned composure. Every nervous tick only revealed the truth. This gala, designed to honor the important, had instead become a mirror exposing their smallness and pretense. Selena set her glass down, tilted her head slightly, a gesture that affirmed she was still there, still present, still in command. And the truth, though whispered calmly, thundered. This room belonged to her, from the chandelier lights down to the silence strangling every breath. If with composure alone Selena had made the entire room bow, then when she chose to deliver the final strike, what else would be laid bare? If this story touched your heart, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Every click helps us bring more powerful stories of empathy, justice, and silent strength to life. Your support is what fuels this journey. Let's keep standing together and rising higher, one story at a time. Stay safe and inspired.